Coming up on Judge Rinder's Crime Stories. CCTV footage captures a violent attack that leaves a man fighting for his life. Could the 30 minutes of footage before the assault reveal who was responsible?
There was no detail about who the offender was. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what risk they posed to the public.
And later, what started as a pen pal relationship between a prisoner and a teenage girl develops into a shocking, abusive relationship with tragic consequences.
I was not prepared for what I saw, and I forget that. That's starting all my life. And she was just there, and the machine was breathing for her.
It was awful, it was horrible. Seeing your daughter like that.
Policing has changed dramatically in the 21st century. Crime investigation these days often involves processing huge amounts of digital forensics, from mobile phone data and social media content to CCTV footage. The challenge for the police? To analyze and break down that huge digital footprint to identify and convict those responsible as quickly as possible. The northeast Lincolnshire coast, Cleethorpes, and 2 miles away, Grimsby city centre. 4:14 p.m. on Monday the 15th of January 2018. CCTV cameras capture a brutal attack.
I'm Detective Chief Inspector Stuart Miller, and I'm one of the senior investigating officers based within the major crime team for Humberside Police. I was advised that we had a male who'd been seriously assaulted, life-threatening head injuries, and that the prognosis wasn't good. There was no detail about who the offender was. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what risk they posed to the public.
The victim was identified as local man Tony Richardson.
He was a lovely young child. He was lovable. He was happy, yeah.
Tony was born in Grimsby in 1972 and was brought up with his older brother, Billy.
I parted from Tony's dad when he was about 8 months old, so I had both the boys on their own. So when he got to 14, he started going on slot machines, and this led to quite a bit of trouble in the end. And he went to a young offenders for 3 months, and I did travel down to see him. Cried soon as I see him when I walked in the place, and I cried all the way home on the train.
Into adulthood, drink and drugs had taken over Tony's life. Despite being set up in a flat, he spent much of his time on the streets.
It's rather a sad life when you look at what could have happened for Tony. However, throughout that, he was well loved by his family, had a circle of friends. Tony lived from day to day, drinking, begging, sitting around, letting the hours pass by.
I'd say to him, why do you go and sit in town? He said, because I can't sit in a flat 24/7, and he spoke to everybody, everybody knew him.
He could be a nuisance, and actually underneath it, he cared for people, he was friendly. There was a nice side to Tony that people who got to know him experienced.
Why had Tony been attacked? What was the motive for this violence?
The police came for me about 7 p.m. and asked me if I'd come to the hospital. When I got there, he was unconscious, and they said this brain injury will, there's no way that he's going to live through it. To me, and we sat there all night until he died the next morning. It was terrible. You're going to start me off now.
DCI Miller was now investigating a murder.
I was briefed that there was CCTV coverage. The offender had approached, was believed to have struck Tony a number of times and left. The footage shows that the offender accelerated in the final couple of strides as they approached Tony and delivered what I would describe as a full-force knee strike with significant momentum behind them directly into Tony's face. It was such a forceful blow and delivered with such speed that the offender actually overbalanced in delivering that blow and had to put both hands up, which caused their palms to actually touch the glass. And watching the footage, you can actually see the plate glass window bow inwards with the impact. What was then shocking was that 2 further blows are delivered to the side of Tony's head. These weren't light blows. These were full force, significant impact, to the point where the second blow, you can actually see that Tony's head bounces off the concrete floor and back up again. After the initial knee strike, the offender appeared to be speaking or shouting into the face of Tony. That, for me, felt extremely personal, and it felt like they knew each other. But I didn't know how they knew each other, and I didn't know why the attack had happened.
The area was well covered by CCTV cameras. The police started to collect footage, hoping to use it to piece together a timeline of events. Would there be clues before, during, and after this brutal attack? Police hoped that one camera in particular, positioned above the exit of the nearby shopping precinct, might give them a useful picture of the attacker's movements.
When we went to obtain that footage, we were surprised to find that for the few minutes immediately prior to, immediately after the attack on Tony, the camera had been pointed in a different direction. That raised some initial concerns and suspicions.
Why did the camera move? Was it significant? DCI Miller's immediate concern was identifying a motive for the attack. He started a victimology.
We were trying to piece together Tony's life. What kind of life did he lead? Who did he associate with? Where did he go? Did he have any disputes? It's a crucial part of investigation. If you understand the victim, there's a very good chance you can understand why they've become a victim and who may be the offender.
Tony's life was one of routine. He would visit his mother for food parcels and eat at the local Grimsby food kitchen, where he became friends with organiser Kath Homewood.
The Grimsby Food Kitchen obviously consists of homeless people, people with addictions, just lonely, vulnerable people, and anybody who just wants to come along and have a chat. We want them to feel included rather than excluded. We met Tony about 14 and a half years ago. We've had lots of highs and lots of lows, but the one thing I can honestly say about him, he was never, ever aggressive, never, ever disrespectful, and everything was thank you for this and thank you for that.
By piecing together information from people that knew Tony, it emerged that there had been some central issues around him going into the local shopping centre.
There were occasions that his behaviour seemed to be antisocial, and as a result of that, he was barred from the local covered shopping centre, Freshney Place.
The thing about a shopping centre is, firstly, it tends to be dry and warm, so it protects you from the elements. Secondly, you have lots of interactions, and that's not just about getting money from people, it's actually about having conversations and feeling part of a community. The problem for Anthony was that somebody didn't want him in that shopping centre.
Could the fact that Tony wasn't welcome inside the centre be connected to his death? Just as police were starting to piece together this information, there was a sudden, dramatic development.
We were contacted by a local solicitor to say that they'd been approached by a client who wanted to hand themselves in for the attack on Tony Richardson.
The client was 44-year-old Mark Finney.
Mark Finney, when interviewed, made an admission to being the person that had assaulted Tony and accepted responsibility for killing him. What he said was that he'd never intended to kill him and that he never intended to cause him serious harm. He wanted to teach Tony a lesson, and the reason he wanted to teach him a lesson was that Tony had caused upset to Mark Finney's wife, who worked as a security guard in the local shopping centre.
Why did Tony need teaching a lesson? What was the catalyst for this fatal assault? The answers would lie in the 30 minutes of CCTV footage prior to the brutal attack. A digital media investigator painstakingly edited together all of the footage from the various camera angles to create a timeline of Tony, Mark, and Sarah's movements.
We were able to establish that Tony had had a verbal altercation with Sarah Finney and another security guard when they tried to eject him, or when they did actually eject him. It appears Tony's not happy that he's been ejected. He's being abusive towards Sarah Finney, and she is escorting him out and then standing at the door, preventing him from coming back in.
Sarah orders her security team operating the shopping centre's CCTV to track Tony. At 3:50 p.m, he's seen making his way into the shopping centre via a rear entrance, and again is escorted out of the building by security.
He's been asked to leave the shopping centre and he's snuck back in. But it's not enough that he's got back in. He's actually using it to taunt her, so we see him making signs at the CCTV. He's directly telling her, "I'm not going to do what you tell me."
Police would later find out that Sarah and Tony's paths had crossed years before.
Tony had used heroin. Sarah, 10, 12 years before, had been a heroin user. She'd led a completely different life to the one she was now leading as a duty manager in a security team.
Tony had become embroiled in a war of words with Sarah, starting the first time she ejected him that day. How would she react to him continuing to disobey her orders for him not to enter the centre?
He's clearly demonstrated that he doesn't have a level of respect for her. And when she sees him still outside, so in the vicinity, she snaps. She feels really angry and she wants to take action to teach him a lesson.
She made a call at that point. That call was to her husband.
Mark had a history of violent behaviour. In 2007, he was sentenced to 12 months for causing GBH to a man he had punched and kicked, fracturing his cheekbone, and in 2013, he carried out a community order for 2 offences of battery.
Sarah is so infuriated by Anthony's behaviour that she calls her husband, and he is one of those people who is incredibly protective towards her. Calling him shows, however, that she wants to take some course of action, and that means what happens next was premeditated.
As Tony sat down in front of the bank, just in view of the shopping centre, Sarah was on the phone, guiding Mark in.
Her and her colleague were stood with their heads occasionally peering around the corner, looking to see where Tony was. They had a direct line of sight to him.
Aware that Mark would be caught on camera, she abused her position of authority and made an astonishing call to her CCTV operators.
We believe at that point, Sarah Finney passed a message over the radio, which was along the lines of a suspicious male walking down Victoria Street. Can you get an ID on him? The CCTV operator has then moved the camera from its default position, looking down the marketplace, which included where Tony Richardson was sat, and the camera's panned 90 degrees to the left.
What's really concerning about Sarah's behaviour is how premeditated it is. She calculates that the CCTV footage needs to be away from where her husband is going to attend Anthony. So she actually fabricates the situation occurring so it deflects the attention. That is cunning. It's cunning and it's callous.
CCTV operator zooms in, zooms out, moves the camera around, looking for a suspicious male. There isn't one. There never was one. It was a complete lie.
She thinks that by diverting attention on the CCTV footage, she can essentially get away with it. But the truth is that that's how little she's thought this out. CCTV is everywhere, it's powerful, it's elaborate, and it means that you can essentially go back in time and piece together the actual story. The missing piece is only a tiny part of the jigsaw puzzle.
Police now had reason to suspect Sarah Finney was involved in the attack on Tony. She was arrested and brought in for questioning. Had Sarah orchestrated the attack? And could police use CCTV footage and mobile phone data to prove that husband and wife were responsible for Tony's death? Coming up, the pressure builds on Sarah and Mark Finney. Could a brand new witness have vital information?
She had witnessed something that had caused her to do a double take. I needed to know what that was because it may be crucial in identifying a motive.
Tony Richardson was attacked in broad daylight by Mark Finney on the 15th of January 2018. Tony died as a result of his catastrophic injuries. Mark had confessed to being the attacker. Now police were closing in on Mark's wife, Sarah, a security guard at the local shopping centre. They suspected that she had colluded with her husband to guide him in for the assault and had moved a camera to conceal the evidence. Could the police prove that the pair had worked together and bring them to justice?
Police had Sarah in custody. They were keen to see how she would react when confronted with the CCTV footage and telephone records of conversations between her and her husband leading up to the attack.
We showed Sarah the footage. Sarah denied any involvement. She said, yes, she had rung her husband. She told him about the altercation with Tony, but she never expected him to come into town. She said she never asked him to come into town and sort it out. I was extremely disappointed with Sarah's responses. They weren't plausible.
Police had to prove that Sarah was colluding with her husband. They turned to the intelligence gathered from the couple's phone, which recorded the time and duration of calls and texts between the pair. When reviewing the footage of Mark on his phone, something stood out.
They noticed that Mark's running essentially towards the attack, but he passes a woman on a mobile phone and something makes her turn and look in his direction, and that instantly draws the police to assume she's heard something.
She had witnessed something that had caused her to do a double take. I needed to know what that was because it may be crucial in identifying a motive.
Police made a public appeal to find the lady in the footage. Thankfully, she came forward.
As he walked past her on the phone, she heard him say words to the effect of, "Is he still there? Is he on his own?" That, for me, was quite clear. He was in communication with somebody who was effectively talking him into where Tony was and giving them an assurance that nobody else was with him. That, for me, was facilitating or assisting that attack.
This new witness evidence, along with the timing of the CCTV camera move just before the attack, all pointed to collusion between the couple.
The fact that the camera, which was indirectly under the control of Sarah Finney, moved at the exact time that the attack was going to take place, just gave me absolute assurance that this was a deliberate attack, that it had been planned between Mark Finney and Sarah Finney.
The Finneys' trial began on the 10th of May 2018 in Sheffield.
Oh, the first day I walked in and I see them two, I cried and walked out. But then I thought, well, no, I'm going to face them.
Mark had pleaded guilty to attacking Tony at the first opportunity, but denied intending to murder him. Sarah continued to maintain her innocence and pleaded not guilty to murder.
We accepted there was no intention to kill. But murder includes the killing of another person with the intention of causing them really serious harm. And that was the basis for us sticking to a murder charge.
Sarah chooses not to plead guilty, and that says something utterly staggering about her personality. She is willing to hang her husband as long as she walks free. And yet again, that shows a huge miscalculation, both of her actions and of the justice system, which takes very negatively to individuals who have a lack of conscience.
Under cross-examination, and as their story started to disintegrate, it was clear that there was significant anger and resentment under the surface. They were in court facing serious charges for something that they didn't feel was really their fault.
Even the judge said they weren't bothered about anything, they was just bothered about themselves and nobody else. There was no remorse.
It was now down to a jury to determine the outcome of the case.
In a murder trial, the jury has a number of alternatives. If they don't find someone guilty of murder, they can find them guilty as an alternative of manslaughter. The difference being the intention for the level of harm that was to be caused. In this case, it was a borderline decision.
Mark and Sarah Finney were found guilty of manslaughter.
I believe that the provocation, Tony's actions, the fact that no weapons were used may also have swayed the jury towards that. But also the tragic personal circumstances of Mark Finney and Sarah Finney around the time of this incident may also have influenced them. They had suffered a miscarriage following IVF treatment. They had been trying for a baby for some considerable time. They were both at an emotional low point. And I think that would have also had an influence on the jury's decision. I would still say, looking at the cold, hard facts, I still felt it was a murder, but I understand that I accept the jury decision.
Mark was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment, but for pleading guilty, received a reduced sentence to 8 years. His partner, Sarah, was not entitled to any reduction. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison.
I'm angry at the sentences they received for that. I feel like it's me who's got the life sentence as well, not them.
They're going to be out in what, 4 years? Poor Lynn's got to live with that. All his family have got to live with the fact that they've lost a son, a brother, an uncle.
This was a complex case for the investigation team. It was important that their hours and hours of work resulted in 2 convictions.
Hopefully, this investigation and the outcome will act as a warning to anyone else. Don't take the law into your own hands. Contact the police if there is an issue. Don't be tempted. In this case, 1 person has lost their lives and 2 people have lost a significant part of their lives as a result of some bad decisions and a moment of madness.
And you just think, such a waste of a life, a young guy like that, and such a callous way to die.
It's just taking time to come to terms with it. You still can't believe it. I still sit in my front room and think that Tony's passing and he's going to knock on the door for his goodie bag. You would never, ever expect anything like this.
It was right that both Sarah and Mark were charged with the same offence in this case, even though they played very different roles in the crime. While Sarah did not carry out the fatal attack, it was vital she should bear considerable responsibility for the consequences of her husband's actions. Although Sarah did not deliver the fatal blows on Anthony, she and Mark were equally responsible for the attack, despite playing different roles in this appalling crime.
Coming up, a teenage girl gets tangled in a dangerous relationship, only to find herself fighting for her life.
Last year, 1.1 million adults in the UK suffered some kind of violence at the hands of their partners. Sadly, domestic abuse is often a crime that is not reported to the police. The abuse will often take place behind closed doors and is hidden by the victim due to fear or embarrassment. Those closest to the victim, family and friends, don't see the warning signs until it's too late. This is the case of Carly Fairhurst.
Hindley near Wigan, Greater Manchester. In the late 1990s, Sheila and Trevor Fairhurst lived in the area and were bringing up their 2 children, Michael and baby of the family, Carly.
There's only 2.5 years between them. They were very close. She looked up to her brother when she was growing up. She was a very sensitive little girl. She was very caring.
She was my little girl. I remember plaiting her hair for her. We always did everything together. We were very close-knit family.
But she just loved, like dancing and singing, and we just used to, enjoy just each other's company.
Carly's personality, her character was second to none. Everybody liked Carly, even from being a little girl. to when she was growing up into a young woman.
I was at school when I first met Carly, and we just become really good friends and used to spend a lot of time outside of school together. We used to light up her room when she'd come in, like she was beautiful inside and out.
At 15, Carly's group of friends were hanging around with boys from the area, some of whom had been sent to young offender centres for crimes that they'd committed.
It wasn't uncommon for girls of our age to write to older boys who was in prison. So it's just what, I think it was just sort of acceptable back then. It shouldn't have been, but it was.
Quite a few of her friends who were writing. It was a thing, I don't know if it still is a thing, where like, they're attracted to bad boys and writing to such a body, or we're going to get together when he gets out and that, you know. You want to start a relationship. One day, she came home from school and she was only 15. And she said, I'm going right to Pilker. She, what? I said, you're not writing to him? She said, why not? He needs a girlfriend. It's only a pen pal. I said, no, Curly. I said, you can't. I said, he's killed somebody.
18-year-old Darren Pilkington was serving a 4-year sentence for manslaughter following the attack on a man outside a pub in Wigan in November 2000.
He's considered a really bad boy. He's had a really checkered past. He actually has killed somebody by punching them, and it actually killed them, and he's ended up in prison. During the time in prison, again, he's consistently had violent behaviour. So to all intents and purposes, this is a really dangerous man.
She said, I'm writing to him. I said, there's no letters coming here. You know, I was adamant that this wasn't going to happen.
I wanted to put a stop to it straight away. And Sheila said, if we do that, it's going to drive her away. So I tried to accept the situation, hoping it would fizzle out.
She knows she shouldn't have been doing it, so she did it. It was the buzz of writing to somebody in jail and him being a bad boy.
For Carly, she's suddenly getting replies from this guy, and he'll be disguising himself as a wonderful human being because he wants her to return that attention and affection. And that's how she gets caught up in it.
And I thought, oh, she'll meet somebody and it'll fizzle out. But she waited for him.
Carly's a young and impressionable girl. Like so many young girls, she's naive. So when she starts writing to him, that naivety is all about believing that he's changed, believing that he can be better. And she's quite intoxicated by the way that that relationship forms.
One day, a letter came and it said, sealed with a loving kiss on the back. And I thought, there's more to this relationship than friends, you know, so I steamed it open. And I weren't prepared for what I saw inside. They was in a relationship. They loved each other. They wanted to set up home together when he came out. When she came home, and I said, you're not just pen paling Pilkington, are you? You're in a relationship. She said, no, I'm not, Mum. I said, you are. I said, I've been told you're in a relationship with him. And she said, yeah. She said, I love him, Mum.
The fact that Carly was already lying to her parents gives Darren an understanding of her ability to be manipulated. She's already choosing to deny her family the truth, which means that she's vulnerable, and he knows that.
Carly had become infatuated with Darren. She decided she would go and see him in prison.
She wasn't old enough to go and visit, so she had to get someone over the age of 18 to take her. He was going through his parole and whatever, and he would be released. And she was on cloud nine, because they were going to set up home together. She wanted a baby with him. I just wanted to play happy families, but it wasn't what he wanted.
When Carly learnt in early 2004 that Darren was to be released, she wanted to be there to meet him.
Nobody would give him a lift home. So she asked me, would I go and pick him up? Pulled up outside the prison and we waited for him. And he came out with his bag over his shoulder, swaggering to the car like he was, you know, the bee's knees.
I didn't like him, and he probably didn't like me because I was Carly's dad, and I wanted the best for Carly. His demeanour and his attitude, it's not what you want for your daughter.
And I looked at him and I thought, what the hell does she see in him? And when we got to know him, there was nothing inside either. He was just bad through and through. He loved the glory of being a bad boy.
When Darren was in prison, Carly would have formed an identity with the relationship that was built on pretense. And he would have become a hero in her eyes. So already he has to live up to some really big expectations. But on top of that, he's got a violent nature. So he's not just going to fall short of her expectations, he's going to come absolutely nowhere close.
They'd only been together 2 weeks on the outside, and then he started reverting back to his former self.
He toyed with Carly's emotions all the time. He would go off with other girls and then come home to Carly and tell him who he'd been with, you know. So what sort of relationship is that, you know? And she's still stuck by him.
We never seen her without him. He was always there, no matter where we went. It was like as though she wasn't allowed to be on her own at any point. I was scared of him. You know, I didn't want to get alongside of him.
She stopped seeing her friends. She isolated herself from everyone, really, including me and her mum.
Behind closed doors, Darren had become violent and was mentally and physically abusing Carly.
All Darren has ever known is to answer any situation that he can't control with violence. And now we have Carly slowly having her personality attacked and affected and disintegrated to some degree by his power and control.
It's only as time goes on that you realise that actually, like, all the warning signs were already there in the first place. The control sort of thing, and then obviously bruises started to appear and you were questioning Carly and it was like, where's these bruises? Oh, nothing, it's fine.
I said, Carly, what's that bruise on your arm? And she said, well, I fell over when I was up King Street. Come home with her arm in a sling. Oh, I was drunk and I fell. And I believed her.
Never suspected anything, because she'd never lied to us before. And she wasn't like that, you know, but no, we know she was covering up what was happening to her.
The problem is, Carly made a choice in not telling her parents. She chose to be deceitful, and that means that she can do one of two things. She can either admit it, which she will feel like a failure doing so, or she can just carry on going, hoping it will change. Remember, what Carly really wants is for this guy to completely change, to go back to this amazing man in the letters. So she doesn't want to acknowledge it yet because she's hoping that some miracle will occur, and that's the power of self-delusion.
Sheila and Trevor had no idea what was going on behind closed doors, and even sometimes in public.
Darren and Carly was in a local pub. He used to make Carly sit in a corner on her own. I think they had a bit of an argument. Carly ran outside, and Darren followed her and grabbed her with her long blonde hair and he bit her on the nose. She ran back in the pub and he followed her into the ladies' toilet and he started smashing her head into the hand-drying machine.
Yeah, I can't imagine him doing that to a doll, never mind another person. It's someone he called love, and she ran off and ran to my son's house where he lived with his girlfriend and the baby and made a promise not to tell us.
On the morning of the 31st of January 2006, Sheila and Trevor received a phone call from Darren out of the blue.
Sheila, he said, Carly's in hospital. She's fell downstairs. I said, why's she done that? He said, I don't know. He said, I was out. He said, and when I came home, she was at the bottom of the stairs. I was not prepared for what I saw. I'll never forget that. That's starting all my life. She was just there and the machine was breathing for her.
It was awful, it was horrible. Seeing your daughter like that.
Sheila was trying to make sense of what had happened, hoping to get a straight answer from Darren.
Because I'm trying to think why she ended up at the bottom of the stairs. And I said, could dog have knocked her down? He said, yeah. He was like jumping on everything I'd said. And he said, yeah, dog could have knocked her downstairs, couldn't it? And I said, what happened? He said, I come in. He said, and I phoned for an ambulance.
Sheila felt something wasn't right. Darren was acting suspiciously. Then the police arrived at the hospital.
She had marks around her neck, and her hand was all bruised. We suspected then, Sheila more than me, you know, Sheila hit the nail on the head straight away.
When the police came, they did a PNC check, and he was wanted. He'd done a burglary, and they got him for that while they was there, and they took him away for questioning.
Coming up, with Darren now under arrest, would the police and Sheila and Trevor discover the tragic reality of Carly's abuse?
Carly Fairhurst had started a relationship with Darren Pilkington when he was behind bars. After his release, the pair moved in together, but he was violent and abusive. Carly's mum and dad had no idea what was going on when Carly was found at the bottom of the stairs with severe injuries. They didn't suspect that he was involved. Now police had Darren under arrest, and the signs were pointing towards his involvement.
Trevor and Sheila had to stay focused on Carly. She was transferred from Wigan to Hope Hospital, where sadly, her condition continued to deteriorate.
One of the senior doctors came to us, one of the consultants. He said, we think, well, we're pretty sure that Carly now is brain dead, but with your permission, we would like to switch the machines off. I said to the consultant, I said, if you're going to turn it off, I said, I don't want to look at all them machines, bleeping and then not bleeping.
The sister who'd been looking after Carly, she was absolutely brilliant, and I said, can I hold her? I've been frightened death of touching her all this time because of all these machines. Can I just hold her? She said, if you want, you can get in bed with her. And you put your arm around her and cuddle her if you want. So I got in bed and I hugged her. I said, you're going to be OK, you're going to be OK.
Sheila got into bed to her, and she passed away. She just, all the colour just went, she went grey.
The police's attention had been firmly on Darren Pilkington. Was this really a terrible accident, or was there something more sinister behind the night's events?
I'm John Keeley, and I was the lead investigator into the death of Carly Fairhurst.
It didn't take John and his team from Greater Manchester Police long to uncover horrific details around the circumstances of Carly's injuries.
Carly had lied at the bottom of the stairs for probably around 8 hours before Darren Pilkington had made the call to the emergency services. Carly had suffered some injuries to her head, and there were some marks around her neck that needed further investigation. He was invited to give his account of the circumstances. During the interview, he told us that she'd fallen down the stairs on the previous evening. When she landed at the bottom of the stairs, he thought she'd fallen asleep and brought down a blanket, a duvet, which he covered her with, and slept together with her at the bottom of the stairs. And it was only the following morning that the emergency services were contacted. He was quite evasive. The accounts that he was giving us were fairly inconsistent.
He covered her up with a duvet and he slept with a brie, didn't he? He went out for 8 hours. He went off out with his mates, and that's what the argument was about. How could he do that? That's how much he cared about her, isn't it? You know, that he left her dying at the bottom of the stairs.
I can remember clearly throughout the interview process and whilst he was in custody, he never once asked about the welfare of Carly or what her condition was. What we were able to establish was that there was quite a lot of previously unreported domestic violence from Darren towards Carly. And this just wasn't an isolated incident. There were a number of witnesses explaining this relationship to us.
We actually got to the point where Darren Pilkington made admissions when presented with all the evidence. He admitted to having lashed out at Carly whilst they were at the top of the stairs in the home address. He struck Carly, which caused her to fall to the bottom of the stairs. The injuries that she sustained eventually and sadly led to her death.
At Carly's funeral, the extent of what had been happening between Darren and Carly became clear.
Some of her friends came to us and they said, "We feel you should know what's been going on." So they told us about what Darren had been doing to her. And Sheila collapsed at the graveside. And that's when everything started coming out then.
What's deeply traumatic for Sheila and Trevor is the knowledge that Carly was keeping the information from them that could have protected her. Their parents, who adored their daughter, they would have done anything to keep her from harm.
Darren appeared in court on the 4th of October 2006. He pled not guilty to Carly's murder.
And he was just stood there. No emotion. His eyes were just staring forward, no emotion whatsoever. He was so cold.
During a break at an early stage of the trial, an agreement was reached between the prosecution and defense teams. Pilkington changed his plea to guilty to manslaughter, claiming he did not intend to cause Carly to fall, but was reckless in lashing out. The court heard that Pilkington had 20 previous convictions, mainly for burglary and dishonesty offences, dating back to 1994. He appeared for sentencing.
When the judge said, I give you 3 years and 53 days, I just jumped up and I said, 3 years and 53 days? I said, you've killed my baby, you took my baby away. And the court usher come and said, if you don't be quiet, you'll have to go out. You just give him 3 years and 53 days for taking my baby's life away, and I'm supposed to be quiet? What mother would be quiet to that?
3 years and 53 days.
And he said, but listen to me. He said, you're not listening because of your emotion. He said, he will be in a long time because he's going to get an indeterminate sentence, which means that he will be kept in until the authorities believe that he's no longer a threat to the public, which he was deemed to be. That's why he got an indeterminate sentence. Darren, instead of 3 years and 53 days, he actually served 10.5 years.
For a decade, Trevor and Sheila voiced their concerns about Darren being released from prison.
Every year, because he had this parole, we had to go through it all over again. As long as he was inside, honestly, that's all we cared about, you know. As long as he was inside, that was the main thing, even though it was painful and upsetting, not knowing. The longer he was inside, the better.
In 2016, the parole board determined that Darren would be released on licence. But within months of being out, he was back behind bars. 2 years later, in 2018, he was released on licence once again.
He's got his freedom now. His life can go on and do what he wants. We never get Carly back. It's us. We have the life sentence, not him.
Carly was just 19 years old when she was killed. Trevor and Sheila have dedicated their lives to the Carly Fund.
We decided to set up the Carly Fund to raise money to keep victim support counselling service open for all people of the area.
Sheila relied on professional counselling to help her deal with her loss. When she realised that local funding to support this was being withdrawn, she felt she needed to take action.
I said, it's all right for me. I said, like, for the rest of my life, but what about other people like ourselves, through no fault of their own, have been thrown into this situation, have nowhere to go? I said, we need to do something for it.
We work in partnership with victim support. With their permission, use their charity number. And this is keeping Carly's memory alive.
And that keeps us going and in turn helping, you know, other people. We've raised over £60,000 so far. If I hadn't have had counselling at that time when I did, I wouldn't be here now. I just wanted to die. I wanted to be with Carly. And that counselling kept me alive.
Our motto is don't suffer in silence like Carly did. People do suffer in silence. They're obsessed by the person, they're in love with the person's controlling them, they're coercive with them. And they just need to get out. I know it's really, really hard for them, but people have told us that they've listened to our story and they've actually got out of threatening relationships.
We all have a responsibility to act if we suspect that someone we know is in a violent relationship. Seeking help or alerting the authorities may be the difference between saving someone's life. The National Domestic Violence Helpline is a 24-hour service available to provide advice and support. In the face of this appalling tragedy, Trevor and Sheila have bravely campaigned in Carly's name and were acknowledged in 2007